Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And on a very wet day in the northwest of England, I have my co-pilot in all things therapeutic, Mr. Ken Kelly.
Hey, great to be here on what is very much a miserable day. And we were just chatting before we went live here, and I'm feeling a little bit miserable from the day, which is interesting how it can affect who we are. And I wonder if it affects our clients and who might present into practice and come to counselling depending on what time of year it is. Interesting study there for someone.
Interesting study, and there's maybe look up seasonally affected disorder, which is something that people have because they don't get enough. I think it's vitamin D from the sun. I'm not an expert on this.
Yes.
But yeah. I mean, when I worked at mine, we used to supply people with daylight boxes to replicate the sun they were missing. So, yeah, why don't you just put that into the Facebook feed and tell us how the seasons affect you? And if you want to know what our Facebook feed is, just go into Facebook and type in Counselling Tutor. It's a closed group. You knock on a door and you can join all the other like-minded people who are studying counselling and psychotherapy and join our massive community, which I think is about nearly 4,000 people now. Ken.
It's getting there. It probably will be by the time that this goes live.
Yeah,
And we're grateful to each and every one of you for supporting us and for listening to this podcast. And you're going to be glad you did listen to today's podcast because it is a cracker, as we say here in the UK, a cracker, Rory. We're going to be kicking off with speaking about something that is topical that comes up again and again, especially in the Facebook group, and that is keeping a journal. Do you need to keep a journal? How do you keep a journal? What does a journal actually do for you? Then some really interesting theory coming your way with Rory, where we're going to be looking at John Bowlby. We're going to be revisiting attachment, aren't we? Give us a little bit of a flavour there, Rory, something to look forward to.
Well, I think that most psychologists, most psychotherapists, a lot of counsellors would agree that our early view of the world is formed by the way we interact with our primary caregivers. They could be carers, they could be our parents. And, John Bowlby was the first person to identify how if, the connection between the caregiver and the child wasn't ideal or was very poor or, to be frank, abusive, how that would affect a child in later life and develop relationships. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about John Bowlby and how he's really influenced the world of counselling and psychotherapy.
Nice one. Looking forward to that. And of course, I know that very recently you've done a series of lectures, which you did specifically for the Counselling Study resource on attachment theory, and they've been so well received. So it is definitely a topical conversation to be having. We're going to be moving from theory with Rory, going on to us kicking around the topic of discussion, I guess, of how our posture is when we're with a client and what we read in the textbooks. It's called SOLA, and we'll be discussing that a little bit more, the pros, the cons, I guess I'll be sharing what my personal feelings are on that, which we discussed before. But you got to stay tuned for that because that's coming up. But let's kick off with keeping a journal. I remember when it was suggested at level 2 concepts to counselling, the introduction, that I should keep a journal. And I was pretty resistant to that, and I didn't know what I would be writing in the journal, what I had for breakfast maybe, what I had for lunch. But there's quite a lot to it, Rory.
Yeah, there is, Ken. And I can remember in my training, I felt the same. What am I going to write? Do I have to write it every day? Do I have to write, the minutiae of my life? And eventually, with a bit of time and a bit of reflection, and here's the key, I think, I realised it was about putting in a history of my growth and changes as I moved through my training. And I'll let you into a little secret, Ken, and everybody who's listening, is I was in the loft at Counselling Towers the other day, and I found a box, one of these, kind of A4 boxes with a button on the side. You open it up and you store documents in. And it was a lot of my old documents, assignments, and that type of thing. And apart from cringing slightly at the spelling, I found part of my journal. And I had to read through it, and I laughed out loud because I could see how far I'd moved personally, how my attitudes had changed we're talking now nearly 14 years since I started. And what struck me was that I had a line in the sand. I could see where I started from and what was pressing for me and what was troubling me at that point. And I can look back now and think, actually, that's pretty much dealt with.
Yeah.
I've dealt with that. So it was just so useful. And it was just so useful to revisit, to remind me that actually, my life had moved on. And, everything we do in training really has to replicate to some extent the client's journey. And a journal is a really good way of doing that.
Very, very much so. And it's useful academically as well, because there comes a part during your training where you have to kind of write about yourself and write about your journey. And that's one of your assignments. Well, it is here in the UK with many of the all of the awarding bodies, because you have to show that you have an awareness of self. And being able to go back through your journal just makes that so much easier to do, because the information is going to be there. And what I sometimes suggest when it comes to journaling is to write about your feelings, to name feelings, because very often we don't have names for the feelings. We've got the very basic names: happy, sad, angry. But there are so many different shades of feelings. And if we can start looking into self and start naming the feelings we have when we have that funny feeling in our tummy, or that weird knot, or that tightness in the chest, then we're better able to be with our clients and help them understand and maybe give them examples of words they might be able to use to describe their feelings. Because I guess feelings are not something that are openly discussed in our culture, not in the Western culture anyway.
Absolutely, Ken. And it's a palette. I think that when I started off, I had a very narrow palette of emotions, and they became more nuanced as I went through training. And in fact, I've just bought a set of emotion cards for client work, where it's about 40 cards with different faces on, showing different emotions, and it names the emotion. And it's quite interesting. I used to see it when I used to train counsellors, that they would start off with a basic palette, a bit like doing a painting. You start off with basic colours.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that as you become more understanding of what you're drawing, which is, of course, you and painting, you then can mix the colours, and it's more subtle. And that transmits, of course, to client work. So, yeah, it's about mixing your palette. That's what I say. Yeah, it's all right, that, isn't it?
I like that very much, because you've got your basic colours, which are the basic names for emotions. Like you got your red and your yellow, and you got your primary colours. But there are so many shades and so many different colours that you can mix by bringing those together. And I think I would be challenged to name 40 emotions. I think I would be challenged. And by writing a reflective journal, you can look for names that would fit for you for emotions. And I like it very much. So have you got any tips of how somebody might go about writing a journal, how they might structure that if they have a difficulty? Because I know I did. I'm dyslexic. Writing does not come easy to me. Any tips that you might have?
Well, yes. I mean, make a start. I think one of the things, they say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And I think that it doesn't matter where you start as long as you start. So write something down, and then just listen to yourself. Take a few minutes out of your day, and just sit quietly, just thinking about how you feel and what it looks. And even if you can't write an emotion down, just write down, what's going on for you, and eventually you'll be able to connect that wide palette of emotions to the narrative. And isn't that just what we do in counselling? Clients come with what's happening. They're saying this has happened and this has happened. That's the narrative, but the emotions are the music behind it. It's the music behind the words. And once we get a handle on that, we're better able to self-manage ourselves. So start writing the lyrics.
Yeah.
For the music to come.
I like that. That's really nice. So we've got palette, we've got it's kind of an artistic feel that we've got today.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I realized is kind of when I look back at my journals, when I started off, the handwriting was very neat, and I was very conscious about almost cognitively thinking what I was writing. But then I got to realize nobody's looking at it except me. It is my process journal for me, as long as I can read it. And so it got more and more illegible as it went on, but I can understand understand what is there because I wrote it, and I don't care what the spelling of the word is as long as I can feel that meaning in that moment. And it's not always about going back and rereading it and reflecting on it. It's about in that moment just letting it out. And I guess mirrors in some ways the counselling relationship, in that very often a client will come in with ideas and feelings that go round and round and round and round in their head, playing out stories and scenarios. But when they come into a counselling relationship, it changes the direction. It no longer goes round and round. It changes direction into coming out. And the same is true with journaling. There is a flow there. You're getting stuff out of you. So it doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter how legible it is. It doesn't matter what the spelling looks like. Just get it out. And if you're not comfortable putting it down on paper, record it. I know that you're an advocate of recording, Rory.
I am, yes. I have difficult days with my handwriting. Sometimes it looks like a spider's crawled into an inkwell and just staggered off and died. And other days it looks like the spider hasn't made any attempt at all to make any movement. So what I do is I just record mine. And I find that's useful because I can hear the timbre of what I'm saying. And also it very much links in as a student to what you're going to look at in your own personal therapy. Because if you're writing a journal, what happens is you start to see the threads of what's going on for you, that stuff that may be just on the edge of awareness. And it's so useful then to be able to say, actually, I could really do with exploring that with another. And of course, that other would be your therapist when you take your own therapy. And I have made a video on a structure of journal writing for those people who like a structure. So once this podcast is up, if you go to www.counsellingtutor.com, there's two L's in counselling. We spell it the UK way, or the British spelling. And if you go to this episode, which is episode 27, we'll embed one of my YouTube videos in there, which tells you, it gives you a structure, how to write a reflective journal. I
like it a lot. And we're going to move away now from journals. We're going to go to theory, and we're going to be speaking about John Bowlby.
Yes, well, he's one of my favourite theorists because he tells us a universal truth that our experiences of childhood really form the people we are. And it doesn't matter, I don't think, which modality of therapy you're training in or you like or you've had. I think a lot of our issues and our views of the world are formed at childhood. I don't think you'd find anybody who'd disagree with that. And Bowlby really was the first person to put that into a theory, to do some research on it. And the striking thing, Ken, it's only been something that's been really discussed at an academic level, I think, since the 1950s. So everything is new. In fact, the biggest change was 1989 with two researchers called Mary Maines, who discovered a different form of attachment. So it's something that's been talked about widely in the worlds of counselling and psychotherapy, and something that I see a lot in client presentations, that eventually, not all, but some, it comes down to their views that they've had in childhood and what they've taken from that. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I realise we only have a little limited time on the podcast. So, as Ken said, I made 3 video presentations, lectures in the CSR study resource, our library, our online library, which goes into it in great depth.
Without any further ado, it's straight into theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
Few people have made a bigger contribution to the world of counselling and psychotherapy than John Bowlby. Born in London in 1907 to an upper middle class family, he was the 4th of 6 children, born to physician Sir Anthony Alfred Bowlby and his wife Mary Bridget Mostyn. He was primarily brought up by a nanny and a nursemaid, only seeing his mother once a day, as was the fashion of the time. At the age of 10, his parents sent him, along with his brother, to boarding school. It may well have been his upbringing which later informed his research and writing on attachments formed between mothers and infants. Initially, Bowlby wanted to train as a surgeon, following in his father's footsteps. However, he became interested in developmental psychology and went on to study psychology and preclinical sciences at Trinity College, Cambridge. After Cambridge, he found work with maladjusted children before enrolling at the age of 22 at the University College Hospital in London. In 1936, he qualified in medicine before going on to train at the Maudsley Hospital in adult psychiatry. In 1936, age 30, he qualified as a psychoanalyst. Bowlby's idea really came to prominence at the end of the Second World War, where he became deputy director of the Tavistock Clinic, an organisation that supported children with emotional and behavioural difficulties, and that clinic still exists today. In 1949, Bowlby was commissioned by the World Health Organization to write a report on refugee children who had been separated from their parents because of death or loss of contact due to the war. His findings he wrote in a book entitled Maternal Care and Mental Health, and they were published in 1951, and the report laid bare his conclusions that, and I quote, "the infant and a young child should experience a warm, intimate and continuous relationship with his mother or a mother substitute, in which both find satisfaction and enjoyment, and not to do so may have a significant and irreversible mental health consequences." The report was highly influential and caused significant and widespread changes for those caring for children in institutionalised care. And a summary of Bowlby's ideas are: children between the age of 6 and 30 months are very likely to form emotional attachments to caregivers. The emotional attachments of young children can be shown in the way they behave to those who care for them. Children will seek to be close to those who care for them, especially in times of distress or at times when they wish to explore the environment. Attachment is an important aspect of psychological health. Any difficulty in attachment may contribute to children that are unhappy and in adult life form an ability to make close relationships. In 1950, he was joined by fellow researcher Mary Ainsworth, who developed Bowlby's theories in an experiment named the Strange Situation. Her experiments were conducted in a room with a one-way mirror that researchers stood behind so they could observe the events inside the room. The room had toys that children could play with. At the beginning of the experiment, mother and child would go into the room. After a few minutes, a stranger, who's one of the researchers, would come in and talk to the mother. The mother would leave the room, leaving the child and the stranger together. The child would become distressed. A few minutes later, the mother would return and the stranger would leave. It's at this point the researchers behind the one-way glass could observe how the baby responded to the mother and take a view on the type of attachment the child has. Now, if you're interested in attachment styles, go over to www.counsellingtutor.com. That's 2 L's in counselling. We spell it in the English way. And go to the podcast page, which is on the front of the website, and look for episode 27. I produced an attachment style questionnaire, which if you're a student, you can use with your classmates as a bit of a social experiment to see what your attachment style is. If you're a tutor, you could use it as part of your lesson plan as a handout for a class exercise. And just to be clear, this is not a scientific evaluation. It's more an exercise to getting you thinking about attachment theory as it relates to you. In closing, I believe we owe a debt of gratitude to John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth and all those researchers who came behind, followed on afterwards, and continue to do research in attachment theory. It enables therapists to understand why some clients have difficulty in relationships. Attachment issues, when worked sensitively, can help clients untangle themselves from a difficult past to engage in a more positive and emotionally fulfilling future.
Thank you very much, Rory. Insightful as always, I say. And you've put together something. It's a little exercise. It's kind of a identify your own attachment style document, just for fun.
It's just for fun. It's just for fun. And what it is, it's a downloadable document. It's got 4 different statements on it. And by roughly saying, well, I agree with these statements, it might just give you a sense of your attachment style. It's a bit of a fun exercise that I used to do with students at college. And I think if you get a few of you, if there's a few of you in the class, download it, and then you do it yourself. It's really good to compare your own attachment style. So, if you've got a class of people who listen to the podcast, I know we have whole classes who listen.
Yes.
And thank you for that. We're really grateful. Why don't you just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on that link and download the document and do it yourself, just individually, and then join a group maybe before you start class and have a bit of a chat about what your attachment style is and do some further research. Be inquisitive, be curious, because it really is a big piece of how we develop in the world. And I totally agree with what Ken was saying, was that it's something that not always taught at any depth in 2-year counselling courses. I used to teach it the best I could, bearing in mind the time I had. But, on psychoanalytical and psychodynamic courses, our friends in the TA world, they teach it in depth, and it really is important, I think.
It's useful, and it's really interesting looking at your own attachment style, getting to know who you are, and that kind of links into the journaling that we were doing earlier. It's just about knowing self, isn't it? The unexamined life is not worth living. So if you want to get that download, you can get it, of course, from counsellingtutor.com. Just click on the podcast tab. It's episode 27. Just click on that and you can download it straight into your inbox. So we had some information, some questions and some discussion, I guess, going on our Facebook group about how one should sit when one is delivering counselling. And I know it's talked about during your studies, and there's an acronym which is SOLER, SOLAR. Is that how you would do it? Solar,
the solar system.
Solar system, yeah.
Solar system, yeah. And it's comes from a book called The Skilled Helper by Gerard Egan, which is a book written effectively for anyone in the helping professions. It's called in the counselling, in the helping professions, and Solar. Yes, it is a way of teaching students right at the beginning of their practice life. And I'm doing inverted. Can you see the inverted commas here, Ken?
Yeah.
The correct way of sitting. And Solar is an acronym, and it stands for sit up, open posture.
Lean towards the client.
It's lean towards the client. Eye contact, and the R, Ken?
Relax. So there it is. There's the theory of it. But, for me, I look at that and I get it. And I get that you have to have maybe a framework and an understanding or something to give you the confidence when you first go into counselling of this is how you're supposed to sit. But I'm also really mindful that you should truly be yourself and fully congruent in the relationship. And I wonder if Solar is not very prescriptive in how you should sit, and are you trying to be someone? And I don't know if that's just going around in my head, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that, Rory.
Well, I think as a template, to start off, because I think when a lot of students start the counselling journey, there's this perennial, am I doing it right scripts.
Yes.
That you always say, am I doing it right, Rory? Am I doing it right? And I think that if you set someone off on that, then what they can do is, like with everything in counselling, they can customise it, they can personalise it. And I just want to say a few words on eye contact. I always thought that we put too much emphasis on eye contact. In Western societies, it's perennially, if he doesn't look me in the eye or she doesn't look me in the eye, they're not being truthful. But if you go to Asian societies, eye contact is seen sometimes as disrespectful. In some Caribbean communities, it's seen as disrespectful. So you've got to be culturally aware with eye contact. And, I've seen students and had to say to students, you look like you're a hypnotist. You look like you're staring at the client. It looks a bit spooky. Because people are trying things out. They're trying it out and they're concentrating. And, so be thoughtful on eye contact, and it may not fit for everybody. And I know some people who just don't do eye contact. It's just be thoughtful of it. It is culturally sensitive, but it's a good starting point, Solar, to help develop your own style. I mean, I don't sit like that. I cross my legs maybe and put my hands on my tummy. That's comfortable for me, and it just fits for me. And I've never had a client say anything about that.
Yeah, I guess Roger's mentioned that towards the end of his career, that the more he was truly himself within the counselling relationship, the deeper the counselling relationship would go. And it's just another stamp that the congruence is so important, that complete transparency and truly being yourself. And I get that you have to have a framework to start off with, and it's there for a good reason, because I've certainly seen with some learners during the time that I was doing counselling training that they would be a little too relaxed when they were doing simulated skill sessions, almost kind of slouched on the chair. And I wonder what kind of impression that is giving to your client. You want to show your client that you're engaged in the information that they are bringing. You don't want to look disinterested. You want to be aware of your body language, things like crossing your arms. That I wonder how that would go across if you were sat there with your arms crossed while the client was talking, or tapping your legs, or tapping your foot, or having a bouncy foot. So it's really about being very aware of where you are and what signals you might be putting out to the client. But I like the R. I like the R in Solar, which is relax. Yeah. Just relax. And just going on to eye contact that you were mentioning, Rory, sometimes the client will lead you. Look at the client. How comfortable is the client with eye contact? Sometimes a client is bringing shame. You know, eye contact during shame is difficult. It kind of intensifies the shame. So allow the client to lead you. They'll show you how much eye contact should be, or they'll lead you in the eye contact, I guess.
Absolutely. And one final reflection: if you've got a client, you're working with a peer, and you find yourself fidgeting and tapping your foot, if I was doing that in client work, that would be something that I'd be bringing to supervision, because there's definitely something subconscious going on there. What is it that makes me change my behaviour with one client and not another? And I would be putting that in my journal. Yeah. And I would be taking that to supervision and saying, you know, when I see this client, I'm tapping my foot to the beat of a drum. I'm just tapping my foot now. I can't stop. I'm putting my foot down. Very strange there. And I would be saying to my supervisor, I need help understanding why my reaction to the client is as such. What's going on for me? So you see how it all links in. You know, the whole of our episode is linked into one thing: focus on the client.
100%. And the one thing that I wanted to leave you with as we kind of leave Solar is how the chairs are set up is often very interesting. And do you sit directly in front of your client, where you kind of 100% linearly facing them, so you're kind of right in front of them? Or do you set the chairs on a slight angle?
Yeah. Well, the classic positioning is a slight angle. Yeah. But I find that uncomfortable, so I just place my chair. But I always, when I move my chair forward backwards, I'll always say to the client or the person I'm working with in skills, if I'm doing skills, is this comfortable for you? Always checking out. You know, and I've seen some quite humorous interactions through the years with students, where students are sat so far apart you literally need a telescope to see each other, and sat so close that you know, it looked more like too intimate. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah. So it's always about checking out with the client and saying, you know, is this okay? Is this distance fine for you? And you know, one other observation, I guess, as a male therapist who works a lot with female clients, I'm very conscious of the space between us. Yes. So you know, I would always say I'll say to any client, to be honest, not just female client, is this okay? And certainly when I work with young people, if I had to move across to them, I would tell them what I was doing. So maybe I need to hand them a pen, or so I'll get a pen because they were doing a contract, and say, I'm just leaning across you to get a pen, just to be absolutely transparent in your actions, because it's surprising. Not all guys are good guys, Ken.
Yeah, I hear you. And that's a really interesting point that kind of really ties in here, is that as we have our personal space that we feel comfortable with. I know I've got mine. I can be standing speaking with somebody, and if they're standing a little bit too close and they come into that little invisible circle of mine, I get a feeling of dis-ease that comes up inside me. And that varies from culture to culture. And it's very interesting. I lived in South Africa for many, many years, and the Zulu nation in South Africa, and I don't speak for the Zulu nation, so this is very broad, but they tend to have quite a distance between themselves, and that's because they grow up in a land that has such great open spaces, so close. But if you go to China, and again, I don't speak for all Chinese people, where the country is more crowded, people are kind of brought up in more close proximity and maybe have less dis-ease of being close. And of course, I don't speak for anybody here. This is just my opinion, generalizing.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Many years ago, when I worked in the photographic industry, we used to go to Photokina in Germany, to a big photographic fair where people of all nations would come and show their wares. And we would stand on the gantry and we watch the Japanese and the Americans, and the Japanese people would, and I don't speak for all Japanese people or all Americans, would stand very close, and the Americans would walk backwards, and they'd engage in this little dance, and you could see literally two people having a conversation, and they'd literally walk all over the place because the one person would be walking backwards. So we have to be culturally aware, we have to be gender aware. And most important, we just have to be ourselves. No one wants to sit in front of someone who's acting as a therapist. No one wants that.
Playing that part of the therapist and being yourself. And I like what you said, Rory, and I think we're going back to it. Let your client lead.
Absolutely.
What's comfortable for the client? How do they feel? How is your client sitting? They'll show you the way time after time. What an episode. It kind of feels like everything's tied in today, Rory.
It is. It sounds like we've rehearsed it and we don't. We just meet up on a Saturday morning, write a few notes down and crack on, don't we?
Yeah, pick the topics that are most relevant in that Facebook page. So there it is, episode 27 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We've covered keeping a journal, what that looks like. Of course, that great theory from John Bowlby. Thank you for that, Rory. And get a conversation going about how you sit or how you feel you should sit with your peers in your learning institution.
Yeah, absolutely. So that finishes off this episode. So as always, hey, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.